Elephants in the Boardroom is brought to you by our friends at Achilles. Achilles is a sustainable supply chain risk management company. They support the world's biggest companies to create and maintain ethical, sustainable, and transparent supply chains. While we navigate our way through the elephants in the boardroom, Achilles are leading the way, helping businesses navigate the risks and opportunities associated with many of these grey elephants. So if you're a person who is interested in the impact of change on your supply chains or your ESG strategies, it's worth speaking to Achilles. Head over to achilles.com and tell them we sent you. Welcome to the Elephants in the Boardroom podcast. My name is Graeme Codrington. As always, I'm joined by my colleague, Dean van Leeuwen. And we are here, as I'm sure you know by now, to talk about those disruptive forces, which are probably fairly obvious and evident all around you, the elephants in the room, if you like. But we're probably not doing enough about them yet. And they certainly provide opportunities that a lot of our clients are not seeing. That's what we're here to talk about. And as always, I'm going to start, Dean, by asking you, what are you seeing? Is there a big elephant stampeding through the world that we should be looking at the moment?
Hi, Graeme. Hi, our listeners. How's your month been, Graeme? You've been doing well?
I have been traveling all over the planet, which is one of the privileges, but also the pains of our job. You know, it's one of the first world problem type things. But what it does do is it allows us to kind of see the world from a lot of different angles. I know you've been traveling quite a bit as well the last month. At least we can still travel now. Climate change might change that. Politics might change it. Wars might change it. But for now, that's what I've been doing.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a busy month, hasn't it? And what's caught my radar is this growing tension between AI and energy use. Artificial intelligence is scaling at incredible speeds, and so is global electricity demand. I came across a report from the World Economic Forum. I think they released it just a few days ago, called AI Energy Demand Explosion. Great title for a report. And they're saying that data centers are multiplying so fast, they are starting to draw as much power as small nations. Now, we've been hearing a lot about AI and how much data and energy it's consuming. But again, it's one of these elephants in the boardroom. We're largely ignoring it. You know, it's just one of those things. It's just a natural part of modern progress in life, I guess. But here's the twist, okay? AI isn't just using energy, it's also beginning to optimize it. And if you want to build competitive advantage in your organization, you need to be thinking about AI and energy at the same time. Now, algorithms are forecasting demand and balancing renewables and optimizing energy flows in real time. And AI is becoming both a consumer and a controller of energy. So they see two futures emerging. In one, grids buckle under the pressure and prices rise and sustainability targets slip even further away. And in the other, AI becomes a catalyst for a cleaner energy transition, powering smart grids, flexible demand, and a far more resilient system. So that's what the World Economic Forum is seeing. They're calling it their AI energy demand explosion. What do you think, Graeme? That's what's on my radar. What do you think of what WEF is saying and what we're seeing there? Is it an elephant in the room?
Well, it's certainly an elephant in the room, right? And one of the reasons for that is that, Dean, neither you or I are engineers, and it's easy for us, especially those of us who love our technology and love our futures, it's easy for us to say, well, we must just build a power station, we need more power for this data center. And then some engineer in the background's rolling their eyes because honestly, even the Chinese can't build a power station faster than about 6 months, right? And the rest of the world, it's normally a 2 to 3 year project. So you can't just wave your hands and power suddenly appears. So definitely it's an elephant that we need to be looking at, and it's going to affect us individually. If you're living in a town or a city near a data center and they want to take your electricity from your grid, this could get interesting, right? And could cause interesting scenarios. But I always wonder, Dean, between you and me, I like to think of myself as the optimistic futurist. But you always seem to come, it's maybe not optimism, but you have much more of an opportunity mindset than I do. That's why I like working with you, because I would not have seen that little twist that you put on it there, that at the same time as causing a demand spike and potential crisis, there's also the opportunity to apply the technology to optimizing national grids and distribution systems and high voltage cables, all of which actually could be tweaked. Again, if we had the technology, you'd be able to find where power is getting lost, where there's a fault in a cable, and the technology itself could actually help us do a better job. I don't think it's an either or. I think both of those will happen. There will be a demand crisis and there will be an optimization win. Both will happen at the same time. But for sure, nobody can ignore this.
Yeah, I think, Graeme, the lens, certainly we come at this from a consulting perspective, which is say, it's always, what's the future we want to create? And how do we use these gray elephants, these forces of change, these forces of progress, to really build a better world? And how do we build competitive advantage? So I came across a really cool post in LinkedIn yesterday, and it's a talk that Jeff Bezos, CEO, founder of Amazon, gave. So let me read this, Graeme. So within 10 to 20 years, the giant gigawatt scale data centers for AI training clusters will be built in space. So that sounds kind of crazy, but we're looking at AI really consumes about 4% of global electricity, and by 2030 this could hit 8% according to the IEA. So imagine a world where these data centers are in space, and that's the interesting twist, isn't it? Because whilst we're looking at energy and optimization on Earth, what happens when Jeff Bezos goes and puts them in space? I think we still need to find out the solution on Earth before we go into space.
Cloud computing is a whole different meaning, right?
Absolutely.
Asteroid computing, whatever it is. Lovely idea.
I just want to think about, this from our sponsor, our partner, Achilles World, because they sit at the center of this. They sit at the intersection of AI, energy, and sustainable supply chains. And what we're seeing is that AI is mapping these carbon flows. It's flagging energy risks. It's predicting where climate or cost shocks could hit hardest. It's turning compliance data into real-time intelligence, for supply chains, how they are optimized, and for performance, and also for the planet. So I think the real question to think about is well, why does this matter? Okay, and I think it's because the clean energy race and the AI race are now the same race. Whoever masters energy efficiency and computing wins the competitive game. So leaders need to align both their digital strategies and their energy strategies. They need to invest in AI, at the same time, make energy efficiency innovation a shared obsession. Bottom line, I think, if AI is going to be the brain of the future, it has to think efficiently. And the leaders, the companies, the organizations, the countries that get that right are going to be the winners in the future. So that's what's on my radar. What's on yours, Graeme?
It's actually quite similar in terms of a scarcity story, Dean. I just, again, came across a report, bizarrely, who knows how this came into my algorithm, but the report of a cement association, like the International Association of Cement Manufacturers or something like that. And it was a statistic which said, and it appears to be properly verified, and there's lots of resources pointing to this, that just houses for a data point. Between 2011 and 2013, so 3 years, 2011, 12, and 13, China used more cement than the United States had used for the whole of the 20th century. Wow is the correct response, right? Now, we know there was a massive building boom, right? And probably they overbuilt. There's been a housing bubble and things like that. So we're not saying that worked out perfectly for China, but it then follows that every year since then, China has both manufactured and used close to 60% of all cement on the planet. And they basically manufacture and use this stuff. Now, those are just mind-blowing statistics, but probably not unexpected. But here's the interesting thing. And again, this proves that I'm not in construction or an engineer. I didn't realize just how much sand had to be used. And I also didn't realize it's a particular type of sand. Apparently, and I know that some beaches you go to have got pebbles and some have got coarse sand and some have got fine sand. It's a particular type of sand that's needed in cement. Then you dig a bit deeper and you realize there's another type of sand that's silica-rich that's needed for silicon chips. Then there's another type of sand, completely different again, that's needed to make glass. And we use glass everywhere. So you then suddenly begin to discover the next layer of the conversation is we are running out of sand, which sounds insane because in our language, we even use the sand on the seashore, blah, 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 as this almost an infinity number, but it isn't. And in addition to running out of the type of sand we actually need for those three different components, it's also a case that we are having in some places in the world, you're having the same disastrous effects that you might have if you would just put a coal mine or an open source, open top mine in a place, because you literally you're digging out sand, but you might as well be digging out rocks in the earth. So the environmental destruction on certain ecosystems, it's mainly river sand, so the messing up of river systems and obviously the destruction of the fish and then everything else that's affected around those river banks. So it probably fits in the same category, Dean, as what you were seeing. We obviously both had similar radars on this month, just about looking at the depletion of the resources on the planet and the fact that there's nothing that we do on this planet that we can just keep doing the way we've always done it. I don't know. I couldn't work out exactly how much sand we had left, and it doesn't seem as if anybody's panicking just quite yet. But there will come a time where we run out of oil, and there will come a time when we run out of power, and there will come a time when we run out of sand, which means there will come a time when we need a replacement for cement. And that means the world has to look very different. This shouldn't be a surprise and it shouldn't be too scary. What it should just mean is that there's an opportunity here for huge innovation and for somebody to do something with a material that we don't have yet. And of course, that means we should be funding the sciences and really making sure that we're putting money into innovation labs. So yeah, hopefully this episode doesn't scare you too much, but the world can't keep doing what we have been doing, I suppose, is the message Dean and I are bringing to you today.
As we say, you have to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Graeme, I think that's a fascinating one, and you're spot on. It's a weak signal. And it's even, when you, and I heard you talking about sand, I just remembered I've also started to pick up the issue around sand scarcity on my radar. And it's something that you kind of you have to look at it twice. You've got to say, hang on, why is sand scarce? I mean, sand's everywhere. You're right, it's the right kind of sand. I mean, I've been doing quite extensive renovations on our property, and the builder's always talking about sharp sand, and it's amazing how expensive sharp sand is. And like I say, I'm sure there are other types of sands as well that they're using. Actually, this could become a bigger issue quicker than many of us imagine. Certainly, if China and the developed world carries on developing at the rate that they are, the demand, the impact on the ecology. This is going to have massive knock-on effects. So yeah, really nice one. Right, so Graeme, should we jump into the quiz?
Oh yes, okay. Have you got one for me?
I'm going to ask you 3 questions. It's kind of general knowledge style. So the first one is a true or false. Okay. So by 2026, companies leading in the AI adoption are projected to outperform their peers by more than 30% in revenue growth. True or false?
Okay. I sense a trick here because you would want to say it should be fairly obvious it's the latest innovation, it's the latest tech coming out. But then I want to interrogate the question just a little bit because I think that there's a lot of AI projects that are not actually having the effect that they want. So I'm going to hedge my bets. I'm going to say if the question is about the AI projects that are actually working, so these are people who've put good projects in place, they are leading the field and they have applied, then I think you could easily get a 30% jump on your competitors. But if on the other hand, it's about people just dabbling in AI, then I think you've got a very, very low success rate. So sorry, I'm going to hedge my bets, but it depends what you mean by your question. I'm going to give you a true or false. Am I being too naffy in my answer?
Yeah, slightly, but I hear the logic, and the logic is right. So the companies that are actually understanding it, are implementing it, and actually leading with it, are projected to outperform their peers by 30% in revenue growth. And that's 2026. At the moment, they're seeing a 15% gap, which in the next 12 months, it's going to double to 30%, which is huge. It's huge performance. So get out there and stop dabbling with AI and start making it work for you.
Just to add, I know we're in the middle of a quiz, but let's give a little bit of consulting advice to people free on our podcast today. There's that MIT, it's a contested report that says, 95% of AI projects are not working at the moment. Hidden in that very big headline statement, which isn't quite as bad as it sounds when you look at the data behind it. The 5% that are working, one of the main characteristics of it working is that senior leadership are directly involved in the experimental process. That it's not seen as something the company does or you push down the line to the Gen X, the Gen Z kids or whatever, but that you actually commit yourself to experimentation. You don't get it right. Again, the second thing is you don't get it right first time either. And the final thing is you also don't commit. It doesn't have to be huge masses of money. There's a lot of money being spent on a lot of stuff that isn't going to work. But you can cycle this up quite quickly, but as long as you commit. Anyway, there endeth the preach session. Great question. I'll claim that as I got that one right, because if I understood the question, then true was the answer.
Okay, second question. So according to, we're going back to this whole energy thing. We're playing with AI energy. So according to the World Economic Forum, which of these sectors has seen up to 60% electricity savings through AI optimization? So the retail sector, utilities, so telecommunications and energy, finance, or transport.
Good grief. Okay, this is a tough one. So the trick in this question is because of AI implementation and knowing those different industries, bizarrely, I'm going to guess utilities in terms of the type of people that I know work in those different industries applying, because that's a big number, 60%. Anyway, that's my reasoning. That
you're
the type
on
of
fire
people
today.
who work in utilities. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
You're on fire. Utilities. Absolutely. That's great. All right. Final question. What term does the WEF, World Economic Forum, use to describe countries developing independent AI infrastructure to avoid dependency on rivals?
I literally don't know. So you're going to give me a list and I'm going to have to guess. Yeah, I literally don't know.
Let me know if you know the word. I'm not giving you a list. It's just...
Oh, no, I literally don't know the word. I mean, it is something that needs a word for sure. I'm not even going to try and make up the word on the moment. What is it?
So it's a slightly cruel question, isn't it? The word is sovereign AI.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that is something for a country to really be thinking about, right? And obviously there's the debate between the US and China, and they see it as a global competitive thing. That's one thing. But I would guess that nations like Estonia, New Zealand, these digital nations are probably thinking along these lines, that they don't want to be beholden to OpenAI or DeepSeek or whatever, that they want to be independent of those. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a real race amongst nations to build and control their own AI infrastructure, the data, the chips, the energy, the cloud, rather than relying on foreign tech giants. So it's where energy security meets digital sovereignty. The training of these large models, they take massive amounts of energy, and pairing AI investment with clean energy independence and nuclear renewables and national data hubs. That's what we're going to see as a big trend over the next few years, is move towards sovereign AI. And I think the next geopolitical fault line isn't just over data, it's over who owns the compute plus the power behind it. So that's my grey elephant prediction. Whoever controls both computers and energy controls the future of intelligence.
I think you're spot on. And let's complete the set with a little bit again of free consulting advice to our corporate clients.
Our CFO is starting to, his hair's going to itch.
Somebody, one of our sales team was saying, hey, stop giving all of this advice away. Anyway, you know that if you want more, you can come and get it. But what I'm thinking, Dean, is that here's a prediction that we just said a few moments ago. You don't have to spend a lot of money to experiment with AI. But I'm going to predict that once you have found out which AI applications do in fact work for you, and separate out the hype from the actual practical value, you wouldn't want to have that AI power in the hands of somebody else. And so you would also want to be a sovereign AI corporation where you then buy in the power, buy in the data set, ring fence it for yourself. So that will certainly come in the future. I wouldn't spend the money to start there, prove the value of AI to your business first, but you probably want to be thinking about being a sovereign AI corporation as well.
Just a final thought here, Graeme. We've lived in a globalized world, and there's a lot of talk about have we reached the end of globalization. I think this trend towards sovereign AI is going to further dismantle globalization. It's going to be a very, very interesting trend to watch.
Absolutely. Well, those are the elephants that we've been looking at this week. Please make sure that you connect with us via whatever channels you're listening or watching us on. Drop a comment, connect with our team at Tomorrow Today Consulting, and let us know, what are you seeing at the moment in the world? And are there any elephants that you see around you that you'd like us to have a big look at as well? Please send us your ideas. After the break, we are going to go into a fantastic interview. We've pre-recorded this one, so I know what's coming up. Dean, you're going to really enjoy listening. This is Tom Eaton. Tom Eaton is a Cape Town, South Africa-based, he does so many things. He's an author, he's a screenwriter, but the reason we got him on is he's also a columnist and an opinion writer in some of South Africa's top news publications. And I follow him religiously. We'll put links into the show notes so that you can do the same. But a few weeks ago, he wrote a fantastic article on just looking at what's going on in global politics, looking at the takeover of authoritarian governments around the world, not necessarily from a political perspective, but from some of the corruption and the narcissism and the self-enrichment. And he just reflected on being South African. Dean, you've lived out of South Africa for many years, but you were born here. I'm based in South Africa. And yeah, we've been through a lot. Coming out of apartheid, going through governments that brought freedom, but then corruption and all sorts. And he just wrote the most fantastic article on the lessons that other countries and other global communities could learn right now from what South Africa has been through over the last few years. And you don't have to be South African to understand it. We unpack each of his ideas, but it really gives a fantastic insight as to what's going on and what you should be looking out for in these shifting geopolitical times. So we're going to take a quick break, and after the break, we'll hear from my extended interview with Tom Eaton. If you feel like change is happening faster than your ability to keep up, you're not alone. At Tomorrow Today Consulting, we've worked with hundreds of leaders who felt exactly the same way until they learned how to spot the big changes coming before their competitors did. Here's what we've discovered. The companies thriving right now aren't the ones with the best products. They're actually the ones who saw the disruption coming and positioned themselves ahead of it. And that's what our grey elephants radar and framework is all about. We've helped, for example, a global mining company rethink its entire strategy to navigate economic volatility and local unrest, shifting from reactive operations to long-term resilience. And at the same time, delivering unprecedented profits. We worked with a major UK retailer, for example, to turn growing pressure around plastic pollution into a powerful brand differentiator, transforming a risk into a sustainable leadership story. So, whether it's through our Skunkworks innovation labs, keynote presentations and workshops, or our strategic consulting, we're here to turn uncertainty into competitive advantage. So, if you're tired of playing catch up with change, visit our website, tomorrowtoday.consulting, because the future belongs to the leaders who see it coming. Welcome back. I am really thrilled to be speaking to somebody that I have followed for a long time. I don't mean that to sound like I've been stalking him, but I possibly have. As you heard, it's Tom Eaton, a South African journalist and writer and an insightful guy and everything from cricket to politics. And Tom, it's really been something that I've wanted to chat to you about. You wrote a fantastic piece, which we will link to in the show notes, in which you said there's lots that we could learn from South Africa. Now, I've believed that for a while because I think that South Africa is where we can look to maybe some hints and signs of what might be coming after capitalism and communism, after the current reality. Because South Africa is a country that has capitalism and communism alongside each other, and we're still trying to work out what that looks like. We've got truly first world and truly third world elements in literally living side by side in suburbs and working side by side in the economy. We are deliberately as a society trying to do something different. Not sure we're fully succeeding. So I've always had the view that South Africa, along with maybe Brazil and Singapore and a few other places, it's worth keeping our eye on them because maybe the future will emerge there. You wrote this fantastic piece that we're going to talk through together now, in which you suggest, I think there might be some stuff we should be learning from South Africa right now. So, sorry, extended intro to give context, but welcome, Tom. It's great. Thank you for having this conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's lovely to have this chat.
So before we dive into the 5 things that you think international community and people all around the world could learn from South Africa, just give us a sense of kind of how you process politics in South Africa and the world as a journalist and an opinion writer.
Well, I mean, thank you for it's an important distinction to make, a journalist and an opinion writer. I don't see myself as a journalist simply because I'm lazy, essentially, is the short answer. And so I am a writer of opinion. I write my opinions on the news that actual journalists gather and present to us. So I do make that distinction. But essentially, I think like many of us who follow politics, it is a bit of a compulsion. It is a bit of a form of self-harm. We can't look away. I think in my case, I've been very fortunate to be a columnist for almost 20 years now. And so it has become a daily practice to not so much absorb or read the news as just sort of slowly lower yourself into the cesspool and float there for a few hours and then something osmoses into you. So, I do say that I can't stop doing it. It is a bit of a compulsion, but it is ultimately fairly toxic. I think also as the world's politics become ever more honest, shall we say, all sorts of facades dropping, I think the toxicity ramps up a little bit. So I'm coming to this as somebody who is supremely ambivalent about writing about politics, in the true sense that I have a foot in each camp, the camp of, oh my God, it's so awful, and the camp of, but we must keep looking because it's essential.
Brilliant. I'm not sure I've ever heard anybody accuse Donald Trump of being honest, or in fact, any politician around the world. But I know what you mean. It's like the masks are allowed to be off right now. And that's fascinating, isn't it? It's almost like the darkness on the other side of the darkness.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of the current sort of liberal outrage is focused on the liberals are still stuck in sort of shock and disbelief and somehow a feeling that, look, these people are mad. These people are stupid. I don't think so. I think what we're seeing is a sort of enormous relaxation on the right, that finally millions and millions of people who are on the far right because of the way they've been brought up, essentially, are shrugging off the facade of liberalism. It's like this enormous release and relief for them to be able to speak and behave in ways that they've been desperate to since they were little. So that's why I talk about sort of honesty. The facade is dropping, the pretense is dropping.
So we'll get into your piece in a second, but just one further piece of context I think is interesting is because there's actually a long history that gets us to where we are now. If people are students of American history, it would be going all the way back to the moral majority of the 1970s and 80s, and then the work that was done in the background when Republicans were essentially in opposition after Reagan, and really putting in place a lot of their speakers in the House were actually the key builders of the momentum we have now. And then, of course, more recently, the Heritage Foundation and the Project 2025 document. So that's American politics, if you're there. But the same thing has been happening in the UK. The same was happening in Germany, the same in Italy. And I think all over the world, as you say, there's kind of a liberal view of the world, which is let's make sure government delivers, good services to everybody, but let's be nice to everybody and everything's okay. And then you've got the right wing, which just is steamrolling over that at the moment. And everybody from Starmer to Ramaphosa, from Modi, I think even possibly Xi in China, are all looking more to attract right-wing voters into their midst rather than, so almost like moving the center towards the right, if those labels are even still valid. And so for me, I have a real concern, and I'm very happy to be open about my agenda in this conversation, is that I want people to see the danger of that, the danger of a right-wing shift in the world. And anyway, let me, that was a statement, not a question, but I don't know how you respond to that framing of where we are.
I tend to go further back in these analyses. I tend to go back to the 19th century, to sometimes even the 18th century. And I think, in the current surge of kind of xenophobic nativist nationalism that we're seeing, for instance, in the US, has clear parallels with anti-immigrant fervor from the 19th century, whether it was anti-Catholic when it was the Irish arriving, or anti-Italian or anti-Chinese, people from over there coming to take our jobs. It's the same pattern. And it all, Bill Clinton said it's the economy, stupid. And it always is. When people feel poorer and get poorer, immigrants, the other, becomes much more terrifying. It's no coincidence that this surge in populism and right-wing populism really got going after the great financial crisis and the arrival of Syrian refugees in Europe. I think together those two things, people felt poorer, people felt anxious, and then there was the other arriving. And I think that, this is a sort of classic form of the rise of the right. I don't think that people can be whipped up by kind of right-wing xenophobic populist ideas if they are feeling well off and comfortable. When your stomach is full of food, you're full of bonhomie, and you shout to those people over there, come have a drink with us. But when you're anxious and hungry, or at least you feel that you are, that sort of anxiety, that xenophobic fear bubbles to the surface very quickly.
And regular listeners to our podcast will know that these fit into the what we call the elephants in the boardroom, Tom, of both big squeezes. So that squeeze of inflation, that squeeze of salary pressure, that squeeze of standard of living, along with, I'd go beyond frustration and anxiety, we call it rising rage. We think it's stronger than frustration at the moment. But that leads us nicely into your article. So maybe just frame this. I hope people clicked on the link straight away and they've already read it while they've been listening to us. But just give us a framing. You feel that countries around the world, maybe Western countries, I think quite a lot of countries, could learn something from what's happened between the end of apartheid and where we are now in South Africa. So that's the last sort of 30 years of South Africa. Before we go through each of the five, is there any more framing to that as you kind of saw this and got into these 5 points?
Yeah, it came very much from watching the response of both conservatives and liberals in the US and Western Europe to the rise of right-wing populism. And what I noticed was a lot of noise, a lot of smoke, a little bit of light, but not very much. But essentially a view that this was somehow special and unusual and not like the sort of so-called collapse of banana republics, in Trump's own word, the shitholes of the world. That corruption in Europe or North America was somehow a different sort of corruption. In the words of James O'Brien, it's corruption, but it goes to a different school. It's not the same. And in fact, I wrote a column a few weeks before this one about the rise of banana republics in Western Europe and North America. The idea of a banana republic has always been, it's somewhere small and hot, far away where dark-skinned people live, which was a fantastically self-serving kind of racist viewpoint that took hold in the sort of white West, that our corruption is not like their corruption. Our decay is not like their decay. So it's this extremely blinkered view. And I saw that really becoming entrenched over the last few years. And I realized that a great many people in the North and in the global North, even fervent critics of Donald Trump, didn't really understand that they were experiencing a kind of Jacob Zuma-esque moment. If you'd gathered millions of American liberals together and said, we've been through a thing called state capture with a president called Jacob Zuma, let us tell you what is about to happen to you. Millions of those well-meaning liberals would have said, thank you for your concern, but this is very different. We're America. These things don't happen in America. So I think that I wrote this piece that we're going to discuss now, largely from a place of realizing that, no, people are people, and they're going through a thing now that we have been through. And I think there are certain things that they can learn from us, which we've been through and are still going through, but hopefully are sort of emerging from the other end of.
As South Africans, we say we, Tom, because both you and I are based in South Africa. Obviously, we have a global view. But South Africa is, besides Brazil probably, one of the only countries in the world that has actually indicted a previous president for the things he did that were corrupt during his presidency. Now, of course, rich people always find a way to subvert the court process, different story for another day. But at least we did it, right? We didn't just put it under the carpet and say it didn't happen. So you have 5 things that you feel that people around the world, countries around the world should learn. The first one is this precise issue, that state capture. That's the language we've used with a capital S and a capital C in South Africa. But the capturing of the state, which has an intention of 2 things. The one is personal gain. So it's the capturing of government tenders and government money and funneling it to yourself, your family, and your friends. But it's also changing the state undemocratically. It's the ability to control and manipulate everything from the police force to the logistics, from the healthcare system to education. And your view is that state capture isn't just a sideline gig of these politicians and leaders. It is, in fact, their goal. We see that in South Africa. Do you see that in evidence, say, in the US at the moment and in other places?
Very much so. I think what's happening in the US, that a lot of the liberal anxiety has been around a kind of the potential for a theocratic fascist state and whatnot. But I think, and while those may be valid concerns, I think under cover of all that hoopla, the union of public and private corporate interests is being rushed through and ahead, the merging, the blurring of boundaries. Essentially, I mean, we're seeing it in the US with Trump move to open up forest areas, forest reserves for logging. And of course, the response from liberals was to cry, oh, the environment. And in that very valid cry, nobody went, but hang on, what is this? This is a money-making scheme. This is a way to have private logging companies get rich. And of course, how do those logging companies get the contracts? They hand over large padded envelopes to important people. So yes, I see it very much happening of the kind of normal quote unquote corruption of Western government being ratcheted up into a system whereby the checks and balances are removed. We've seen, for example, in the US, the FBI being essentially gutted. So very much so, it seems like a move into really industrialized state capture.
My favorite example of that right now is just a week or so ago as we were recording, Keir Starmer in the UK announced that they are thinking of introducing an ID card, right, that everybody would have to carry around. I'm guessing the response that you and I would both have to people is follow the money, just always follow the money, because who happens to own probably the company that the government would outsource this ID card development to, and it would be around about £100 billion exercise over the next decade. Oh, it's Tony Blair's oldest son happens to own the company that is the most likely. We shouldn't be surprised. We keep being surprised, right?
So I would argue that example you've named, and perhaps the logging example I've named, are traditional old-fashioned corruption. I think that's been going back since forever. But I think
fair point.
In order for that to become state capture, the key of state capture is to weaken the institutions that stop that from happening. So that will always happen. But the oversight committees, the policing, the law enforcement. So essentially, it's yes, it's all very well for a government to own a part of a bank in this analogy, but state capture is where government figures remove the burglar alarm, replace the local police with their own people, and make sure that the bank is robbable. So I think that's the difference between, good old-fashioned corruption of connected people scoring big government contracts and a kind of systematic dismantling of the checks and balances that are supposed to stop this sort of thing from happening. As we saw in South Africa with our own institutions, our version of the FBI gutted completely.
So your second point then is, and the label you gave it is like before, is gone. So this whole idea, whether it's the MAGA go back to making America great again or some fictional time in the past when it was supposedly better. But it's worse than that. It's that hoping that as soon as the current corrupt leader is gone, we can go back to some form of normal. Your view is, right, there is no normal to go back to because of this destruction of the system. Is that correct?
Right. So there's an ideal normal to go back to, although I think as the years pass, we all slowly lose grasp with what that actually looks like. But yes, very much so. I think once a system has been dismantled, it takes almost exponentially more time to get back to how it was than it took to break it in the first place. So, for instance, in South Africa, our government, I think, is no longer deliberately breaking the law enforcement systems, but cobbling them back together is proving to be extremely difficult. Likewise, I think, there's this view in the States that if you just vote out Trumpism, that somehow, all the previous bureaucrats will get their jobs back. Well, think about what that actually looks like. I mean, first of all, if you're going to purge the American civil service of the MAGA cadre, the deployed cadres of the MAGA movement, every one of those is going to sue. So you're going to lock up the courts for months, for years. It's not going to happen. But if the Democrats flooded back in a landslide in the next election, it's going to take years just to remove the embedded MAGA cadres, by which point the country changes again. There are new economic and political upheavals. So there is simply no going back. There's no simply switching off and going back.
And that leads to your third point, which is even going forward, we create more problems because even though we might recognize, oh my word, this is the worst government, the worst administration we've ever had, let's get rid of them, vote them out, like we did with Zuma, like the UK did with the Conservatives, like America did to get Trump in, believing they were dealing with Biden. The problem is the systems are broken, right? So there's no, you'd say whoever comes next, well, they get too much leeway, right? We allow them to do things they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, so I mean, this was a sort of mea culpa on my part, and for your listeners who are not in South Africa, there was a phenomenon in this country called Ramaphoria, which broke out when Jacob Zuma was replaced by Cyril Ramaphosa. Ramaphoria was, as it sounds, like a kind of euphoria that Ramaphosa was now president, because the thinking was, and I was slightly guilty of this myself, that now there's somebody who is, can offer more technocratic, progressive leadership, and at very least won't just, spend taxpayers' money on chicken coops in Nkandla. It'll, but of course that response, that was a psychological response from myself, not based on any kind of rationality. And so my concern is that, as I say, that once the boot is taken off the neck of a country, the response is to go, I've been saved. My liberator is here. And of course, that ain't the case. And I mean, this is now an extreme form that I'm going to mention now, but we're seeing this play out in the world currently, 70, 80 years later in Russia and Ukraine. That, Russia's argument about Ukraine is that it's full of Nazis. Now, why do they claim that? Well, because Ukraine essentially collaborated with the Nazis in the Second World War. It welcomed the Nazis in. Well, why did it welcome the Nazis in? Well, because it saw the Nazis as liberators from the long history of Soviet sort of, occupation and oppression from Moscow. So Ukrainians saw Nazis as liberators. They were relieved when the Nazis arrived, which I think is a sort of perfect example of what I'm saying here. That that's obviously an extreme example, and I'm certainly not suggesting that Cyril Ramaphosa is a sort of Nazi to Jacob Zuma's Soviet Union. But it does go to show that when you feel liberated or saved, or just relieved by the next regime, by the next administration, I think you switch off your critical faculties. And you give way too much leeway and way too much credit, which can bring its own problems.
And then your fourth point is it could even be worse than that. That really competent people who know what they're doing will not actually want to get into that game. I mean, I cannot imagine that a really serious person would want to be the next American president. It's a poison chalice to take on the job, because it's going to be such a big hole therein with such big problems to fix and so much division. Now, hopefully somebody really clever, smart, values-driven. It's more likely, and we're seeing this maybe with Starmer in the UK and Carney in Canada to a lesser extent, competent but not purpose-driven, not taking the opportunity to make a change, just trying to make sure the ship doesn't sink. And that's not what's going to get us into the future. So you say there's a danger of coming up with the fact that there are no adults in the building here. There's nobody who's actually leading us.
Yeah, I think that is something that we naturally fall into the trap of believing that there must be somebody who knows what's going on. I think that's a very human response. Well, I don't know, but somebody does know. And, it's usually somebody in a suit in a government building. They must know what they're doing. They must be, and I think certainly Brexit, Trumpism in our own country, kind of the Ramaphosa immobility of the last many years has shown us that that's not necessarily true. There's a great screenwriter, William Golding, who wrote a book called Nobody Knows Anything about Hollywood. And I think it's fairly true for government as well, that nobody really knows anything. And worse, everybody is waiting. It's fear-based, a bit like Hollywood. Everything is based on the terror of losing money or making a mistake. And so there's this sort of paralysis that sits on even well-meaning progressive people in government, because you have to first check, with everybody else. You don't want to put your head above the parapet first. What I also meant, though, by, there are no adults left in the building, was I don't think we can fully underestimate the people in power in terms of their response to crises. So I think we still harbor the sort of childhood cliche that when things get really bad, someone will do something because they are, at very least, they have strong self-preservation instincts. In South Africa, we've seen that that's not true. The ANC is all the sinking ships and crashing plane analogies have become so boring now. We've used them for decades. But the ANC's trajectory is a sort of steepening curve towards zero. It's over, essentially, for the ANC. And you would expect good, cunning, self-serving politicians who actually have any kind of personal ambition to be jumping ship like mad. They'd be starting parties, they'd be renouncing things, and they're not. They're all just staring at the onrushing, rock bottom and doing nothing. And I think that's incredibly telling, both for South Africans, but also perhaps for international listeners to this, to remember that you can't assume that someone is going to step in and do something. I think that might be a fantasy from childhood.
I think you meant your final point as a sort of positive ending to it, that you say, and finally everything can change. and it can change incredibly quickly. Of course, it could just keep falling into the hole and smash against the bottom, and that can happen quickly. But when change does happen, and it can happen for the better and things can get better, it actually, well, let me leave it as a question. Did you mean it as good news that things can change quickly, actually?
Yeah. And I think that, South Africans of our age feel that in their bones, because we grew up in a system that was never going to change. It felt like all autocracies and all sort of mad race-based systems, it felt that we were living in a sort of mad magical kingdom that was going to be like this for thousands of years. It's the Hitler's 1,000-year Reich fantasy that nothing will change for 1,000 years. It felt like it was forever. We also grew up in a bipolar world of the US and the Soviet Union, and that was going to be the case forever. And then within a decade of it, in fact, within 5 years of each other, the Soviet Union ended and the apartheid regime just disappeared, just evaporated. And I know that there was a lot of hard work and there was a lot of financial wheeling and dealing and very high stakes negotiations. But the change was extraordinarily rapid. I was, I think, the first generation of boys that didn't have to do military service. And I'd grown up from little knowing that would happen. It was an unshakable law of my life. When I turned 18, I was going to go and do my military service. And then suddenly I didn't. And it was as if these rules that were carved in stone and handed down from the mountaintop had just turned into sort of candy floss in the water. And so I think people of our generation and our growing up in South Africa and watching the world realize that when things change, as you say, they can change incredibly quickly. And I think that is hopeful in one respect. It doesn't help us because we can't predict that change. It's also wildly unpredictable. But I think that I've learned not to slump my shoulders and give up and go, well, this is how it just is now. That's never true. There is no, this is how it is now. Anything can change at any moment. And as I said, very, very quickly. So I suppose, yes, it is an optimistic and consoling idea.
I hope so. And, if we are to learn anything from history that's useful for the future, it is that systems change and things are always changing. And sometimes when you feel like you're at a point where the worst that it can be, that's the moment at which deep systems change can take place. And that's certainly our view in our team, that's where we are finding ourselves. And if there are places that we can point people to get lessons, to get models from history, to get frameworks for change, all of those will be useful. And like you, Tom, I think South Africa has a rich history of both good and bad that can point us to the future. Let me leave you with the final word. What do you think people should be doing about it? Whether it's an individual person or maybe someone who's a leader in a business and maybe has a little bit of control over leading a team and maybe a bit of budget to be able to do something in the world. Maybe 2 or 3 things that you could leave us with that we could do in response to this changing world.
Well, I must preface this by saying that I'm a professional writer, which means that I'm sort of deeply ignorant of the ways of the financial world and teams with leaders and things. I'm the leader of a team of 1, sometimes a team of a half if I haven't slept well. So I'm very unqualified to say this, but I think what is essential, I can't speak on a sort of systemic level. I think I'm simply not qualified to know what goes on with that sort of strategy. But I think on a personal level, I would urge every single person listening to this or watching this to spend less time online. I think that being online is hurting our minds, it's hurting our brains, it's hurting our connection with each other. It's pumping us full of dread. And I don't mean that in the right-wing sense of, it's Project Fear, they're trying to, warp you. I just think that there's a physiological response to being constantly plugged into everything that is simply not psychologically healthy. So I think that the less time one spends with your face pressed into stuff that actually this particular detail doesn't matter to you. There was a great quote that I saw on the internet some years ago, which was, remember, you are not an embassy. That means you don't have to release a press statement about world events online whenever anything happens. And, I do tend to be that person a little bit. I tend to want to, opine on this or that. But then I remember, hang on, you are not an embassy. It is not your job or your role to publish some statement on this. So personally, I'm trying to revive and protect my brain by being a little bit less online. I do think in the next few years, we're going to discover this phenomenon called extremely online and the monstrosities that it does to people. I think, the assassination of Charlie Kirk in the US, the alleged shooter, this idea of being extremely online has already cropped up there. And I think it's going to float further and further into the mainstream focus. I think it's just bad. So personally, less time online. And in terms of teams, I got to say my one little bit of advice would be to read history. History is the great teacher in so many ways, if only in that it gives one perspective. If only in the sense that you can go, oh, wait, this happened then, and this is how they dealt with it, and these are the three things that came out of that process, and maybe we can nudge away from that particularly bad one and towards those particular two good ones. So yeah, less time online, more time reading history books, essentially. That would be my very, very basic advice.
I love those two pieces of advice. I'll add one more. Don't forget to smile and have a little bit of fun. And I'll use that to get people to sign up for your power diaries. Tom writes fictional entries in rich and powerful people's diaries as a way of bringing a little bit of lightness to some of the heavy news. Having said that, Tom, where can people find you online, even though you're trying to not be quite as online as you might have been before?
Well, they can find me on my Substack, which is called Another Day in Paradise with Tom Eaton. I specifically created a Substack to get away from the social media platforms. I know it's also a form of social media, but it felt slightly less evil. So I'm there. That's my sort of column writing. I've also got a more personal one about my novel writing called A Note from Tom Eaton. That's also at Substack. But all these things are linked to via my Facebook page and my Blue Sky account. So I'm very online, hopefully not extremely online.
And then finally, quickly tell me about your novel. I've only just started reading it and couldn't finish it before this interview. But tell us quickly, in case people have enjoyed this conversation and want just maybe a slightly different version of you.
Well, the very short version is I've written my first cozy crime novel. It is about a struggling actor called Arnold Prinsloo, not Arnold Vosloo. That is a cause of major concern and confusion in the novel. And he is accused of committing a murder, which he then decides to solve himself. And it was great fun to write. It's been very well received. And it is available in most bookshops in South Africa.
And I guess on Kindle online for anybody else who wants it around the rest of the world.
It is currently, yes, it has in fact just got on Kindle internationally. We've lifted the geo block for South Africa. It is now available everywhere. So yes, if you're in the rest of the world, it's on Kindle. Oh, and it's called An Act of Murder, I should say. An Act of Murder by me.
There we go. We'll have all these links in the show notes, and please feel free to connect with Tom. If he has made any sense to you at all, he's worth following wherever he writes. Tom Eaton, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Graeme. That was great.
Elephants in the Boardroom is brought to you by our friends at Achilles. Achilles is a sustainability supply chain risk management company. Achilles support the world's biggest companies to create and maintain ethical, sustainable, and transparent supply chains. So while we navigate our way through the elephants in the boardroom, Achilles are leading the way, helping businesses navigate the risks and opportunities associated with many of these grey elephants. If you're a person who's interested in the impact of change on your supply chains or ESG strategy, it's worth speaking to Achilles. So head over to achilles.com.